So I've been running out of fuel once, and this was a pretty bad situation. It was kind of I was kind of running out of luck, I guess. A friend of mine's boat, somebody cut the rope loose, so the boat was drifting down the river Danube. Then I had to kind of tow him back to the harbor, and there are a few bridges here in Linz, and I was approaching a big bridge pillar, and my boat was running out of fuel, and so I kind of switched to reserve. I have a tank that kind of, you just give it a little kick, and then some fuel gets into the suction area, and then I can continue my journey. But it was a very scary situation, and I almost crashed, the big 3.5-ton boat with my rib. I almost crashed into the bridge. It was very scary. So I already ran out of fuel, and that's why I want to give you a few inputs and give you a few ideas on how to manage your fuel on a boat, and how to really get the most out of fuel planning, out of your range, and just be safe and be sure about your fuel planning. So my background, I'm a student pilot. I'm training to be a professional pilot someday, and we do a lot of fuel planning, and I think it's working pretty well the way we do it in the airlines and in aviation generally. So I try to implement things we do very well in the boating world as well. So stick around to see how I do the fuel planning on my boat. So there's that rule that in small boats you should fill up at every gas station, and that is true. Like in really small boats, the tank might only be like 25 to 50 liters, and that is not a lot considering the total weight of the boat. So if you're riding like empty or with a fuel tank, it will not significantly feel a big of a difference weight-wise or payload-wise. But if you're full in a big boat, you will notice that you will be slower, speed will be less, your fuel consumption will be more, your payload will be less, so you can take on board less people than you would normally be able to do. So these are disadvantages to have your boat always filled up to the fullest. And that's why I do not do that. Well, I have a very small boat. I have a 4.5 meter long boat that has a 25 liter tank, so I would fill that up to the fullest anytime I go out. But I'm getting a bigger boat with a 110 liter tank, and I will not fill that up to the fullest every time I go out. So that's why I do my fuel calculation procedure to avoid having a full tank all the time, because full tank means less payload, full tank means more fuel consumption, and full tank means you're slower. So these are the kind of disadvantages to that. So the basic range of a boat will be fuel on board divided by fuel burn at a specific speed, and that times that speed. That will be the basic range of a boat. And it is important to use the usable fuel, because usable fuel is often not depicted in a performance data spreadsheet of a boat. Typically, the tank volume is depicted, but usually you cannot use the whole tank. Like if the tank is 110 liters, I'm sure I will only be able to utilize 100 liters before my engine stalls. So that is something to consider as well, that you have usable fuel that you can use. You have to disregard the rest, unfortunately. So how do you actually find out the fuel burn of your boat? Best thing to do is to calculate it yourself. Well, there are performance sheets around for kind of every new boat, but the best thing is to calculate it yourself. So you would have a full tank, you would weigh that tank, then you will go out, drive for a few hours, then you will come back, see what's left, and then you have your fuel consumption, and that is a pretty reliable way. Another way to do it is you have with Mercury, it's called Mercury Vessel View, so you can look up your phone with the Bluetooth toggle device that connects to your engine, and that would tell you your fuel consumption, your instant fuel consumption, and that is the most reliable way. If you don't have any of those things, then take your performance sheet and calculate with your performance sheet. That is pretty good as well if you have the same kind of payload they do. And another thing that I would not recommend to do is to use your fuel gauge. As I said in a different video, your fuel gauge is very inaccurate. You can only really use it when you're standing still and nothing is moving for a few minutes, because then your fuel gauge will give you an approximate percentage of how much fuel you got in the tanks, but typically it's very inaccurate and unreliable. So fuel burn varies substantially with certain conditions on a boat. Now, first off is obviously a load. So if you're just alone by yourself, cruising around with a half empty tank, it will be so much less fuel consumption than driving around with 6 people on a boat. And the range can vary up to like 40–30%. If you increase the load of the boat, of course, your performance will decrease and your fuel consumption will increase. So just keep that in mind. Another one is growth on a hull. That's why your fuel consumption is typically less at the beginning of the season than it is at the end of the season if you have not cleaned your boat, because the growth of your hull will increase the drag in the water, and that will slow you down, and so you need more throttle to go at a specific speed, and then your fuel consumption will increase as well. Also things like engine conditions, age, so parts of the engine will wear out, that will decrease the efficiency of the engine, and that will then increase, of course, the fuel burn. Things like propeller, so how is the condition of the propeller, what is the pitch, what is the size. Actually, you do have a certain propeller for a certain load, but of course you have to find kind of an average that kind of does everything. Now, weather will significantly influence your performance as well. Waves, currents, winds, those are all things that we'll take into consideration per trip. So we have a trip, we look at the winds, we look at the currents, and then put that into our sheet and calculate our average ground speed that we would have. So I got my spreadsheet ready. This is how it looks like. This is pretty simple. So this is the trip distance. This is actually a trip in Croatia. The trip distance is 15.6 nautical miles. The ground speed is 17 knots. The fuel flow is 14.3 liters an hour. These are the things I came up with. These are my calculations. I need 13.17 liters. So almost 1 hour of a drive. And then I have contingency fuel, and that fuel is really for when something is happening that is unexpected. You would have a contingency fuel, like waiting times at a harbor or something, or unexpected winds and currents. This is the contingency fuel. This is 5% of the trip fuel. And we do have the alternate fuel, that's 13.17 liters. Now, we do not have an alternate harbor in this scenario, so we just would use the trip fuel for that. If the harbor or the marina that you wanted to go to is closed, you can easily go back to your origin and with that alternate fuel. If you have an alternate harbor near the destination harbor, you could use that, obviously, and that would decrease the overall amount of fuel that it would need to take on board. So less fuel is typically better performance-wise, but of course you don't want to run out of fuel halfway. Then there's final reserve fuel, which is just 45 minutes of cruising fuel, so you could cruise for 45 minutes with that fuel. Then the block fuel, which is about 40 liters, so you should take up 40 liters. When you're good to go, you can go ahead there, and you can go even back if you want to. So that's how I would calculate my fuel for the Quicksilver 555 Open. So in Austria, there are no regulations regarding fuel planning on a personal watercraft. If there are regulations in your country, of course, follow those regulations and do what they tell you to do. But I do it like this, and I do well. Since that incident, I did well. I never ran out of fuel, and I'm pretty confident about going far distances without refueling now that I have that kind of fuel calculation table going on. I hope this video inspired you and you enjoyed it. Consider subscribing if you did, and if you want to see more content like this. And until that, see you around. Bye.